Welcome back to Bible in a Year or So. This week we polish off the Old Testament. Please read Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. And let me introduce you to them. Starting with Habakkuk. First of all, we don't know anything about Habakkuk except his name. The other thing that we know about Habakkuk from reading his writing is that he could not understand why any nation as wicked as Babylon was going to conquer Judah. Sure, Judah was bad, Judah was faithless, Judah was pretty rotten, but Babylon was totally evil. What's going on here? So God shows Habakkuk his total plan. And he gave Habakkuk 3 wonderful assurances to encourage him in the dark days. And you should notice these. The first is in Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 4, where he is assured that the just shall live by faith. The just shall live by faith. And this should sound pretty familiar to you because it's quoted 3 different times in the New Testament. It's a very important passage. So that's the first assurance. The just shall live by faith. The second assurance is in chapter 2, verse 14. The earth shall be filled with the glory of God. Which means even though the world was full of sin now, one day it would be filled with the glory of God. That's a big assurance. And then the third assurance is in chapter 2, verse 20. The Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord is in his holy temple. See, Habakkuk thought that God was either absent from his creation or that he didn't care about it. However, what he's assured of in this verse is that God is in complete control of everything. Things may seem terrible, and sometimes things are terrible, but God always turns confusion into celebration. That's Habakkuk. The next one is Zephaniah. Good King Hezekiah had some descendants that were all really rotten, except for his descendant, good King Josiah, who began a whole spiritual reformation across the whole nation of Judah. And by all outward signs, the nation was undergoing a real spiritual renewal. Well, and it's during this time of good King Josiah's reform that Zephaniah starts prophesying, because he knows that much of what was happening was superficial, was artificial, was not going to last. This was not going to last. So, and what we know is despite Josiah and Zephaniah's best efforts, the sins of the people continued. And Zephaniah pleads with them. Let me read you this. Zephaniah pleads with them in chapter 2, verses 1 to 3. He says, "You disgraceful nation, gather round before it's too late. The Lord has set a time when his fierce anger will strike like a storm and sweep you away. If you humbly obey the Lord, then come and worship him. If you do right and are humble, perhaps you will be safe on that day when the Lord turns loose his anger." So Zephaniah is pleading with them. As you know by now, God loved his people enough to discipline them. Judgment was coming because of what we are told in chapter 1, verse 17, where God says, "They have sinned against me." But Zephaniah ends with a wonderful promise, and I want to read it to you. Jerusalem, the time is coming when it will be said to you, don't be discouraged or grow weak from fear. The Lord your God wins victory after victory and is always with you. He celebrates and sings because of you, and he will refresh your life with his love. So there's this wonderful reassurance that things will be better later. And then comes Haggai. Now, most of the Old Testament prophets preached before the exile. During the exile, Ezekiel and Daniel had prophesied. After the exile, we get Haggai and Zechariah and Malachi. And the point of Haggai is to really encourage the exiles to build that temple. Finish God's temple. Get it up. Get it done. And that's the point of Haggai. And then we get to Zechariah. Zechariah was also a prophet during the exile. After the exile. And his name means God remembers. In case you thought God forgot, God remembers. And this book, the book of Zechariah, really ranks with Daniel in terms of foretelling the future. And Zechariah really pictures the coming Messiah. He tells more about the coming Messiah than any other prophet except Isaiah. If you look up Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9, everyone in Jerusalem celebrate and shout. Your king has won a victory, and he is coming to you. He is humble and rides on a donkey. He comes on the colt of a donkey. That should be very familiar to you. In case it is not, see Matthew chapter 21, verses 4 and 5. And then look at Zechariah 11, verses 12 to 13. I told them, pay me my wages. Pay me my wages if you think you should. Otherwise, forget it. So they handed me my wages, a measly 30 pieces of silver. And then the Lord said, throw the money into the treasury. So I threw the money into the treasury at the Lord's temple. This ought to sound familiar. In case it does not, see Matthew 27, verses 9 through 10. And then here is Zechariah chapter 12, verse 10. I, the Lord, will make the descendants of David and the people of Jerusalem feel deep sorrow and pray when they see the one they pierced with a spear. They will mourn and weep for him as parents weep over the death of their only child or their firstborn. And in case that doesn't seem familiar to you, see John chapter 19, verse 37. And then here again, Zechariah 13:6. If any of them are asked why they are wounded, they will answer, it happened at the house of some friends. See John chapter 1, verse 11. And then see Zechariah chapter 13, verse 7. The Lord all-powerful said, my sword, wake up. Attack my shepherd and friend. Strike down the shepherd. Scatter the little sheep, and I will destroy them. See Matthew 26:31, John 16:32. And finally, in Zechariah chapter 14, verses 3 to 8, the Lord will attack those nations like a warrior fighting in battle. He will take his stand on the Mount of Olives east of Jerusalem, and the whole mountain will split in half, forming a wide valley that runs from the east to the west. And then you people will escape from the Lord's mountain through this valley which reaches to Azal. You will run in all directions, just as everyone did when the earthquake struck in the time of King Uzziah of Judah. Afterwards, the Lord my God will appear with his holy angels. It will be a bright day that won't turn cloudy. And the Lord has decided when it will happen, this time of unending day. In both summer and winter, life-giving streams will flow from Jerusalem, half of them to the Dead Sea in the east, and half to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. And then there will be only one Lord, who rules as king, and whose name is worshipped everywhere on earth. And if this isn't familiar to you, see Acts chapter 1, verse 11. See Revelation chapter 22, verses 1 and 5. And then finally, we come to the book of Malachi. And Malachi means my messenger. And this is the book that is by the last of the Old Testament prophets. The enthusiasm that was built by Haggai and Zechariah is gone. And Malachi's efforts are directed at the moral and religious decline of this period. The priests are a bunch of ingrates. See chapter 1, verse 6 through chapter 2, verse 9. Men are divorcing their Jewish wives and marrying idolatrous women who, of course, are leading them into idolatry. And people are failing to give their tithes, and so they're cheating God. See chapter 3, verses 8 to 10. The closing section of this book contains God's last words to his people for 400 years. God doesn't speak through the prophets after Malachi for 400 years. He's the last prophet of God to come onto the scene until the time of John the Baptist, which is 400 years later. Malachi prophesies this forerunner in chapter 3, verse 1, and chapter 4, verses 5 to 6. These are taken by the Christians as prophecies of John the Baptist, as you can see in Matthew chapter 11, verses 13 and 14, Matthew chapter 17, verses 12 and 13, Mark chapter 9, verses 11 to 12, and Luke chapter 1, verse 17. Jesus himself interprets Malachi as referring to John the Baptist, the new Elijah. These verses are also the reason why the Jews set an extra seat for Elijah at their Passover table, so that Elijah will find a nice welcome. I love what Malachi has to say to the people in chapter 3, verses 13 to 17. You have said horrible things about me, and yet you ask, what have we said? Here is what you have said. It is foolish to serve the Lord God all-powerful. What do we get for obeying him and from going around looking sad? See how happy those arrogant people are. Everyone who does wrong is successful. And when they put God to the test, they always get away with it. But all those who truly respected the Lord and honored his name started discussing these things. And when God saw what was happening, he had their names written as a reminder in his book. Then the Lord, the all-powerful, said, you people are precious to me. And when I come to bring justice, I will protect you, just as parents protect an obedient child. Then everyone will once again see the difference between those who obey by doing right and those who reject me by doing wrong. I love what Malachi has to say to the people because it's good to hear that God notices faithfulness, that it is noted and it's remembered by God. And let me read you Malachi chapter 4, verse 3, and then this will be it for the Old Testament. The day of judgment is certain to come, and it will be like a red-hot furnace with flames that burn up proud and sinful people as though they were straw. Not a branch or a root will be left. I, the Lord all-powerful, have spoken, but for you that honor my name, victory will shine like the sun with healing in its rays, and you will jump around like calves at play. When I come to bring justice, you will trample those who were evil as though they were ashes under your feet. I, the Lord, the all-powerful, have spoken. And if you think, I wonder what this means for me, because I'm really not all that faithful. The good news is for next week, read Matthew. Read Matthew. We cannot be faithful. We cannot be faithful. So God took care of that. Read Matthew, and you will find out how we are clothed in the righteousness of Christ. That's for next week. For this week, thanks a lot for your kind attention. And now we are done with the Old Testament. Until next year or so. Thanks a lot. I'll see you soon.